Good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Tom Murphy Show. If you've been following the news recently, there's been a lot of Supreme Court decisions that are going to be momentous in this nation going forward. And I think we wanted to take a show to discuss some of the implications of the now, in some sense, notorious Hobby Lobby decision that the Supreme Court had. And I've said in other things, it's the worst decision probably since the Dred Scott decision in the 1850s that preceded the Civil War. But tonight, to discuss that with me, I'm very lucky to have Lisa Windjam, who's the Vice President of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood in the Hudson-Potomac area. Lisa, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
Let's get into the decision, now the Hobby Lobby decision, where the Supreme Court 5-4 voted in essence that an employer, for his religious reasons, could not provide birth control to his employees. Now, I can imagine what your stance is on this, but could you elaborate on how this is going to affect us in the future?
Sure. So, the court held that closely held for-profit corporations can not provide birth control, contraceptive coverage to their employees, the contraceptive coverage that's required under the Affordable Care Act, the new health care law, based on their religious beliefs. So, we are obviously very, very, very disappointed in this decision. It really puts women and their needs second to their bosses, right. And it puts their boss in control of their decisions. And so initially when the court came down with the decision, they said it was a very narrow decision. And then the next day, ordered federal courts to start rehearing cases of other employers also contesting their obligation to provide contraceptives for their employees. So that, the issues about contraception, who should make those decisions, and certainly religious freedom are big questions and big issues. And as Justice Ginsburg said in her dissent, the court has really opened something up here.
Yes. Even beyond the idea of birth control. I mean, to me, what the court has done in the last few years that's really outrageous with Citizens United and with this decision is to say that corporations have the same civil rights as citizens. So that to me, especially on the religious level, a lot of us come from varied faiths, but almost all faiths believe that the essence of your spirituality is your soul. Now, you can't tell me a corporation has a soul. I've just been around too long. That can't be possible.
Well, there's true religious freedom is the right to not only to practice your religion, but to not have someone else's religion imposed upon you.
Yes.
And certainly giving bosses control over that very personal decision about whether a woman should have access to birth control is very troubling. I mean, birth control is not, one of the myths I hear is, well, birth control is cheap, or they can just use condoms. That's kind of one of the things that we've heard, right, in all the discussions after the case. Well, that's not really true. No. Birth control is not inexpensive, and some of the longer-acting methods of birth control can intrauterine contraceptives, for instance, can cost $500, $600, $700. That's important.
And birth control isn't always given for the reason of preventing pregnancies. Doctors sometimes prescribe birth control pills for other...
Well, and women use contraception for a whole host of reasons, and whether it's for birth control or to, control heavy menstrual periods or for other reasons, that's between a woman and her doctor,
exactly.
Not her
boss.
Her and her boss.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't see this, and I hate to get graphic, but you wouldn't see this if it was turned the other way. If it was, you don't see anybody going to court saying, I don't want my health care coverage to, cover Viagra.
Right.
Because that's a different issue.
Well,
but
Justice Ginsburg and the justices who dissented really felt that this ruling would have negative economic impact on women and really set a dangerous precedent where the religious beliefs of bosses are prioritized over people's access to health care. And you raise a great point, is that you don't hear someone saying right now anyway, well, no Viagra, right? On the other hand, where does this go? I mean, the court says it's a narrow ruling, but what if your employer's religious belief is that they don't want to provide vaccines? Is it,
or transfusions?
Right,
yes.
Blood transfusions. So there's real concern here that this could be used to allow employers to pick and choose what kind of care they want to allow their employees to have.
And the other, if I own a corporation, it's just say you own a corporation, you're a female, and you have strong religious beliefs against birth control, then you don't use birth control, and that's protecting your religious beliefs. Nobody can force you to use birth control, but for you to impose that, like you said before, to impose that on somebody else because that's how you believe, it's outrageous. It just, to me, I realize how bad this is for contraceptive and for those rights, but for me, what really scares me, although that's scary enough, is this idea that we're going to put corporate rights above individual rights. And it's happened now twice in the past few years. And it's very scary because, it's not as if corporations don't have enough power in the United States of America. And now we're giving them civil rights like we have. So our protections are going to be subordinate to their protections.
And putting their civil rights over the rights of women and their families.
Yes.
And, we know that other for-profit companies are already filing complaints. They want to be exempted from paying for birth control, and several are asking the administration's permission to legally discriminate against people who identify as LGBTQ just because of the Hobby Lobby decision. And that is what the court opened up with this decision.
Right, yeah. And where did it, that's going to be interesting to see if a lower court will apply the Hobby Lobby ruling to instances like that.
Right, and I think it's important to remember too that although the decision is going to cause women definitely who work for those companies to lose their coverage, which is very distressing and very concerning. I mean, this is legally mandated coverage, and
under the ACA,
under the
Obamacare.
ACA.
Yeah.
And but it's really important to remember too that this decision does not strike down the entire birth control benefit. However, the number of closely held corporations are large,
yeah.
And the amount of women who are employed by them is a large number. So it does have vast impact.
I read somewhere that 52% of the corporations in America are closely held corporations. We all think of IBM and Xerox, which of course are publicly owned, but most people work for companies with 50, 100 people.
Sure, and I think that when people really look at the list of some of the companies that are like Hobby Lobby, and Hobby Lobby is a big company.
It's not big here, but it's big outside.
It's big,
yeah.
And another name that comes up is there's a list of like 82 different companies.
Yes.
And they're bigger companies than you think. I mean, companies like Dell are closely held corporations. Now, Dell's not part of these lawsuits, but as an example of what a big company, how large a company can be, certainly that's a closely held corporation that could have this power.
Now, we were talking before, the Senate today tried to pass a bill to directly overturn Hobby Lobby because it wasn't decided on civil, the civil rights aspect. It was decided upon a law that the federal government passed during Bill Clinton's administration.
So the Senate today took up the bill. It was called the Protect Women's Health from Corporate Interference Act. We're calling
Says it all right there in the title, right?
We're calling it the Not My Boss's Business bill.
Oh, good. I like that, yeah.
And the Senate took it up today, and unfortunately, the bill's not going forward. And I had the vote somewhere. It was a 50. Oh, now you got me, Tom. 53-48, I think.
Well, I think because you had a few Republicans,
Yes,
Susan Collins.
we had
and,
Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski, and Mark Kirk came over.
Okay. So
So
it's probably
53.
56. Yeah, because I think there's 53 Dems, so it's probably
So
56 to
right.
44.
So unfortunately, that bill is stalled for now. But today's vote is also a perfect example, however, of how we at Planned Parenthood and the Planned Parenthood Action Fund will hold politicians accountable for this kind of vote. I mean, the senators who voted against this will be held accountable for
As
their
well they should
vote,
be, yeah.
as they should be.
And I'd just like to point out here, too, because this vote was a vote to begin debate of the bill.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So the 44 senators who voted no are basically saying we don't even want to talk about it. Because all that vote was to end a filibuster. And this past Senate, the Senate for the past few years has used filibusters to a degree never before seen in American history. And they've really used it to have bills not be debated on. So the Senate, which is supposed to be, the American bastion of, debate and higher, governmental thought, won't even begin the debate. Mm-hmm. And it's really unconscionable. And if Democrats were doing it, I would say the same thing. But to not allow good ideas to come up before the public and let the public weigh the pros and the cons via debate is really a lack of, they're not doing their job.
And I think it's important to remember that, birth control is not a controversial issue. I mean,
No.
that we're here in 2014 still debating about
Right.
women's access to birth control is really troubling. 99% of sexually active women have used birth control at some point in their life. It's one of the most common things in the world. So, or in this country, certainly. And people support women's access to birth control. And over again, we see that here in New York when we were talking about our own version of a bill that, the Assembly passed. It was called the Boss's Bill. Very similar, introduced for these very reasons, because we wanted to take action to prevent this before it happened. We could have addressed Hobby Lobby before it was decided. And the New York State Assembly voted on that bill and they passed it. And again, it wouldn't come up for a vote in the New York State Senate. But this is a bill. We know that people support birth control, they support access to birth control, and they don't support letting your employer interfere with your access to birth control.
Right, because on another level, even if we were talking here about your employer having access to your health records, having access to deciding whether you need counseling, deciding whether you need treatment for this or that, everybody would see it clearly. But to think that that somebody, because of their religious belief, and even if they're legitimately and sincere religious beliefs, and I applaud that, but that doesn't mean I have to believe that. It doesn't mean that I have to. Like you said before, that's part of being American, is that I have the right to be an atheist. I have a right to be a Catholic. I have a right to be Jewish. I have a right to be Muslim. And
true religious freedom respects the moral decision making of others, and certainly to take a decision, decision out of a woman's power, to take away her moral agency is troubling. The court has really put women's interests and the needs of women and families second.
Right. Yes.
To their employers.
Yeah, it's well, if that bill isn't going to pass in the Senate, there is a proposed constitutional amendment that's been bandied about for the past few months as a result of Citizens United, to just basically change the Constitution and say that corporations are not people and corporations do not have civil rights. And hopefully people will start to be, whether you're far right or far left, you have to really think of the implications of what they're saying here. And even if you're a far right person, but you believe in the civil rights of all Americans, which I think most people do, you got to look at what's going on here. And this is scary, like going down the line. It's
again, it's certainly for us at Planned Parenthood to see that birth control is under attack.
Yes.
Is that women are going to be denied access. that, you know, most people would agree that when you don't open your doors to the general public, right, like these corporations do, you don't get to pick and choose who you serve